Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and today I am going to be talking about how to use thought leadership to drive your business. And this is particularly important if you are in a B2B relationship or working with larger, more complex problems or issues where you're not necessarily just selling a gadget or a fairly straightforward product. This is for people who are in more complex businesses, and I'll explain more a little bit about the differences between thought leadership, marketing, and traditional marketing. But I get this question all the time: how do you become a thought leader? Why is it important? And if you are in especially a B2B business, or if what you're selling is very complex, where there is a longer decision-making process, then thought leadership could be a really, really valuable place for you to be in. It's not just a place for authors or speakers or consultancies. I do believe that thought leadership is something that every single person can practice. And I'll give some examples later on about how you can do this yourself inside of LinkedIn, for example, where people are constantly finding each other using search. And also, they may be trying to get to know you better and to know how you provide solutions, you as an individual or you as an organization. So, to begin, I would love for you to share how do you use thought leadership to drive business, to drive, again, awareness of what you offer as a product or solution, to drive the actual leads coming in, and also even how do you close and use your thought leadership to move people through that decision funnel. So let's get started. First of all, I love what Eric Bowles has just come right out and said. He says this: the future of sales is 3 easy steps. He says, add value, add value, add value. I cannot agree with you more, Eric, because in the end, this is what thought leadership does. It adds a ton of value. And I hear from people all the time, sure, I want to tell people how I add value, but I don't want to give away the shop. I don't want to tell them all my secrets because then they won't call me, they won't buy me. And the reality is, and this is why it's so important about the type of problem that you solve. If you're solving a pretty simple problem and then you tell them, well, this is the answer, then of course they're not going to come back and hire you because you've told them what the solution was to a simple problem. Can't find something? Google and search for it, right? The real value of thought leadership is when you're solving such complex problems, you're giving people value by telling them everything that you know, sharing all of your wisdom. And if they can actually solve it, then fantastic. Maybe you just provided that little bit of an edge to help them over that hump or obstacle. But if they try it and they realize, I can't figure this out on my own, guess who they're going to call? They're going to call the person who added a lot of value, who got them to this point, because the belief is, well, you've done this many times. You have an interesting approach. You have some data or evidence. I should give you a call because you may have the solution for my very complex, wicked problem. So that's why I believe that if you want to engage in thought leadership, you need to put it all on the table and to do it in a very, very specific way. So the way I think about all of this is this simple solution. Who's your audience? And you can't serve everybody, so be very specific about who you are trying to add value to. And then what is their challenge? What is the problem that you are in particularly good place to be able to solve? Be really clear about what that problem is. Be really clear about that challenge. And then be clear about what your solution is. From a research perspective, you think about this as a hypothesis. You do research to test a hypothesis so that you can prove that it's a solution, that it works. And when you're doing research, all you're doing is just going through this cycle over and over and over again. Who's your audience? What's their challenge and problem? What's a potential solution for them? And you go back and test it with the audience. Is this a solution? Did we get the challenge right? And you keep repeating this cycle over and over and over again. This is how I do research. This is how I do thought leadership. It is always focused on this. The biggest mistake I hear from people and I see from people is they just start writing. They think that thought leadership is about creating content. It's not. thought leadership is being really clear who your audience, what their challenges, and what the potential solution can be. And that's why thought leadership is so important to be focused on this, because in the end, is the goal to put out a beautiful piece of content, or is it to truly help an audience and to help them identify what that problem and challenge is, bring light to it, help them see a different perspective from it, and then provide solutions. And one of the solutions, obviously, is to call you, to contact you, because you have a solution that can help them with that problem. So I wanted to just go through and think about the ways to think about all of this. And I have a bunch of slides for today. And if you want a great resource, I can't think of a better resource than this book it's called Competing on Thought Leadership by Robert Boudet. And he writes, and his definition of thought leadership is the acclaim, the fame, the brand association that an organization or an individual achieves by becoming known, becoming famous for providing superior expertise that solves a complex problem. And I love this because you become known, you become famous for something. And the thought leadership isn't just one piece, it's the whole aura that an organization or an individual creates over time and demonstrated expertise through the content, through the videos, through the blogs, through the speaking, through the writing, the multiple formats that you can express thought leadership in, that you are an expert in this space. And by expert, I don't mean that you are the one and only expert. You are one of many, but because it's coming from you, with your experiences, with your experiences of providing this to many different people and organizations, you are an expert. And because you've done it and demonstrated this over and over again, people come to see you and say, maybe you could help me. So one of my best experiences in creating great thought leadership is writing something, putting it out there, and we drive a lot of traffic to that afterwards, but we know we've done it right because we only need just a few people to pick up the phone and literally call us and say, have you been sitting in my boardroom? Have you been standing behind me at my desk? How did you know that I had this problem? You described it so beautifully. We need to talk as soon as possible. Because again, you're not trying to solve the problem for everyone. You're trying to really show your thought leadership around a particular problem that you are uniquely able to solve. So one of the biggest challenges I find is that is this, and this is another beautiful, I'll make it a little bit bigger, a framework from Robert Boudet, where he talks about the different types of marketing. And I love this because it talks about the complexity of your target audience or your target customers' problem and the complexity of the solution. So it could be a really complex problem, but it could be a really simple solution, and you may not need thought leadership as part of your marketing program. The example they gave is for image marketing. Let's say it's Starbucks. You need caffeine in the morning. This is not a hard problem. You need coffee in your cup. You need to get it quickly. So it's much more around image marketing, not so much around thought leadership. Could you imagine writing thought leadership for coffee? But if you have a much more complex problem, let's say it's around digital transformation, really complex, which is why there are a lot of different thought leadership content, conferences, videos, webinars, so much around digital transformation because it's really complex. There are many different types of digital transformations by industry, by size of company, by the maturity level. So there's lots and lots of complexity in both the problem and in the solution, which is why it's a ripe area for thought leadership. So think again very clearly, what are the types of problems that you solve? And the more complex, the more difficult the problems, the more you need to be thinking about engaging in thought leadership. So I just want to take some time. There are a lot of comments in here, and let me just scroll through them and take a look at some of these. I love this again. Eric, you're like on fire today. People don't buy Legos, they buy the ability to build the Millennium Millennium Falcon. So this is, again, coming from Stephanie Buscemi, who was the former CMO of Salesforce. I mean, people don't, again, buy the little bricks. They're looking to build this beautiful thing, the Millennium Falcon or the Death Star, for those of you who have ever built Legos. And so this is the nice thing about being able to think about the problem, the solution that you are trying to solve for people. I love this also from Viovel. The best way to learn yourself is to teach and help others. And I can absolutely agree with that one of the best ways to think about how to develop your own solutions, to come up with more creative and deeper solutions to complex problems, is to be learning yourself about how people are doing this. I find that my research combined with my client work really helps deepen and drives this virtual cycle of everything coming together. I do research, share with clients come back, give me more feedback about this, and I develop even better thought leadership and solutions. So let me go into that, because I think one of the key issues that I find with thought leadership is that we don't think about what I call the outline of this audience challenge and solution. And every piece of thought leadership that you create needs to follow a very specific outline. So you may be thinking, well, what's thought leadership at this point? Is it like a long research report? Is it a blog post? Is it even a tweet or a series of tweets? And it's all of those. And they follow a very specific outline. If not within a particular tweet, then overall thinking about your thought leadership presence. Again, thought leadership isn't just one piece. It is everything that you put out there that establishes you as an expert to solve a particular problem with a unique solution. So therefore, I do believe that you need to think about this outline. And this is the outline that I live by for everything that I do. And it's something that's so simple. What is the problem or challenge? Give people a really clear idea of what is that problem, and be really clear about, if you want to have more time and space, to give evidence. This is where the research comes in, evidence that this problem exists. And the research doesn't necessarily have to be surveys or focus groups. It can be the fact that you have worked with tens or hundreds of clients, that you have seen this problem happen over and over again. That evidence can be, I just talked to somebody who had this problem. Let me tell you more about it. Go into detail around this. And then, if you can, talk about why the current solutions have failed, because they didn't take a certain process or did it the wrong way, or technology was not implemented correctly. Why do the current solutions not work? Then what's the new solution? What do you see that no one else can see? And again, what evidence do you have that the solution works? Again, it can be coming from research and surveys, qualitative and quantitative, where you're talking to a lot of people, but it can also come from your field experience. You saw this problem, you did this, and it worked. Before and after pictures, before and after testimonials, for example. And then if you want to go into it, you can also talk about the complexity. How does this solution vary depending on the industry of the organization, about the size of the organization, about the maturity of the organization? You could be solving a very complex technical or mechanical problem as an expert in a very specific field. But because of the complexity, you can still use the same outline. What's the problem? What's the potential solution? And then also the last part here, what do you do? What are the actions to take? One of my pet peeves of thought leadership is that some people do a great job with these first two sections. And on the very last page, there are 3 bullets that talk about, okay, so what do you do about this? How do you take the first steps? And I believe that, again, it's sort of driven out by thirds. The last third of your thought leadership, or a third of the volume of the thought leadership you have, needs to be focused on what actions to take. What are the first, second, and third things that you do? What are the potential obstacles or barriers you're likely to run into, and how do you overcome them? And then also, what are additional resources available out there, in addition to yourself, of course, that they can tap into? You're putting out all of your knowledge, all of that thought leadership, all of the solutions that you have available to people. Because again, you're solving complex problems. And if you can add value, as Eric was saying earlier, if you can add more information and value and solutions to help people to get on the way, the more value you are creating, the more valuable you become, the more known you become for this area of expertise. So, one of the things that I find so interesting is that you can use this outline of problem, solution, and action in anything from your blog posts to bigger thought leadership. This is something that you can use as an outline for everything that you do. And it's a really good way just to think about this narrative outline, is what I call it. Robert Boudet calls it the problem solution outline. But it's all the same thing. What's the problem you solve? What's the solution? What action should somebody take? If you have that outline really worked out, then you can use that as a foundation for everything that you do. Everything from writing an article or blog post to a video that you would do, like a 2-minute video that explains what you do in a very specific area. It could also be something that you write an entire book around or report around. And let me give you an example of how this could be used, because you can also use it for your LinkedIn strategy. So last week, I talked about how to make sure that your LinkedIn profile, your headlines, and the contents of your profile really showcase who you are, what you do, and what you want to be known for, what you want to be famous for, because it is your brand. And your thought leadership can do the same thing. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by the way that you share and engage on LinkedIn. So this is something that anybody and everybody can be doing. Let me just get back to it. I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Okay, here we go. Let's make it really big. So again, I always start with who the audience is, that audience, the challenges and the solutions that you can have for them. And then how do you engage and share on LinkedIn? This determines your strategy for what you will share and what you will engage around. So you can like a particular article because it points to one of these 3 things. You can comment, and comments are such a beautiful way because you're engaging with somebody else who's already talking about some of these problem solutions, and you're adding your own point of view to it. And just so you know, comments are like the juice behind the LinkedIn algorithm. If you comment on somebody's post within 24 hours, it is just like LinkedIn juice. It just pushes the algorithm and amplifies it to other people. The same thing applies if you write something. Asking people to come in and comment within the first 24 hours is the best way to ensure that your comments, your posts gets elevated to many, many more people inside of LinkedIn. You can be sharing something with your unique point of view that points to a particular problem or solution or action that you think people should be taking. You can share videos, images, polls that, again, point back to all of this. So again, what are the challenges that they have? So the next time you're on LinkedIn, I encourage you to go and look for these types of opportunities. Look for just the existing content that's there and like it, share it, comment on it. And the next time you see an article that you find interesting and compelling that really illustrates your point of view, again, that outline that you saw, share it back into LinkedIn. You probably have seen these little share buttons on inside of articles or places like the Wall Street Journal. Share that back in, but don't just share it. Put in your point of view that comes from your outline, from your problem solution action statements, and say why you think this is so compelling back into your audience. And then also see what's resonating with people, because you could never create a big piece of thought leadership content and become known as an expert in your space. And you can see if it's working or not to see if your own posts get liked, shared, and commented on. And just keep doing this over and over again. I find that it is such a great way to engage with your audience around the problems that you want to engage with them. So be very clear about who your audience is, what are their challenges and problems, and then also what the solutions you believe are going to be there. So let me just see if there are any other comments. It's pretty good for now. We have some great, Ibti, thank you so much for joining, coming in from India. We have Mohammed coming in and commenting, and Pool also saying that this is, again, LinkedIn is a great platform for sharing knowledge. Thank you so much for joining. And Michelle also says, show value by sharing ideas. Exactly, sharing the ideas that you may have for yourself, but also the ideas that you find compelling from many other people. So I think the one thing I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit more about the actual process for creating thought leadership content. And so I'm just checking the time because I could go on and on talking about this stuff. So if you are writing articles on LinkedIn, this is a simple way to be thinking about this. Again, starting with your audience, problem, solution, and the actions they need to take. And then oftentimes people will say, okay, here's a topic I can talk about. I encourage you to not write down topics, but to start with headlines. Think about headlines, because headlines have a point of view. They have an idea of what value you're going to create. Here are 3 ways to be able to increase your thought leadership. Here are 5 things to avoid doing, 5 common mistakes that people make around thought leadership. Or it could be, again, my headline for this past week promoting this live stream and the articles I'll be writing this week is the 3 ways to engage in thought leadership, small, easy steps you can take. So it's really taking these headlines and then putting them and developing more content around that. So capturing, organizing these ideas. And you're not going to be able to necessarily write them all the time. But it's when you come across a particular problem that a client is having, putting a headline behind it, and then starting to collect evidence. Again, evidence is so important. How do I know that you're an expert? How do you know that you understand my problem? How do I know that this solution is going to be the right thing to do? How do I know that these actions are the right ones to take? So the more evidence you can create, collect underneath these headlines, the more ammunition you're going to have, so that when you're ready to create that content, it is available and at your fingertips. Then I would encourage you not to write, not to sit down and write, because unless you write and do that every single day, it's not going to be your natural way of communicating. I encourage you instead to talk your story, to talk through that outline that I talked about. Record it. Put on a video or record yourself an audio, put an outline together again, or put it into PowerPoint, whatever is most comfortable for you, but talk it through. Then transcribe it. I use otter.ai, which is just easy. I upload the file, the audio, the video file. It's frankly how I create content. I take this live stream, take the audio, upload it into Otter, get a transcript, and use that as a foundation for the LinkedIn newsletter that I publish every Friday. So there's a method to this madness. And then write the article, give it to a writer, or even better, make a video, because you talking through your ideas is so much more compelling than just listening to just the words. And then what I would encourage you to do is to some best practices. Think about getting a buddy, getting somebody who can become an accountability buddy, who can go along the way and just give you feedback that works, that doesn't work. Ideally, somebody who understands the audience and the problems that they are facing, or can just be a really good sounding board to reflect back to you. Wow, that was really good. Or I'm not clear about what you're trying to say here. Block time to do this, because if you don't make it a priority, don't treat yourself as your most important client, you won't get around to doing it. And then finally, be very specific. Name names. This isn't just about high-level ideas, but give specifics around the particular problem and solutions. You may not be able to say, well, my client, X name. You can say, I have a client who had this situation, but it's very clear that this is the problem that they had. And then finally, I like to always say, write or talk as if you're talking to your mom. Don't use industry jargon. Words like synergies are really hard to understand. What does that mean? I guarantee you, your mom probably doesn't know what a synergy is. Or I like to say, an 8th grader, they probably don't know what a synergy is. What does that mean? And so get real in the language that you use. If you're talking and speaking in a video or audio, if you are writing, avoid what I call jargon speak, because no one will know exactly what you mean. Be really clear and straightforward. So one of the things that I do want to say is that we have a couple comments here. Jay has a great comment. Headlines and commentary proliferate on the web. Even so-called evidence without provenance replicates. Facebook, I think, is what you're trying to say. And the problem here, again, to Jay's point, is that headlines aren't necessarily the key thing. This is where I talk about the evidence that needs to be there. It can't just be an opinion piece. How do I know you're an expert? You need to be able to demonstrate it. But I do believe that the headlines themselves are an incredibly good way for you to be focused instead of a topic statement. Okay, so let's see. We have a question from Marissa. For those who are multiple hyphenates, so your volunteer activities differ than professional fields, in your opinion, does it dilute your audience or increase it when you're sharing on multiple topics? This is a great question, Marissa, because you could be serving multiple audiences in your content, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. This is so much an issue around context setting. And I particularly have an issue in that I serve two very specific audience. I have one that's very focused, for example, on disruptive leadership. And I have another audience that I know is that I'm very passionate around, which is around women and women of color in leadership, and also all the diversity and inclusion. So how do I merge these two? When do I talk to them? I think it's being really clear who you're talking to at that moment. And if you have highly divergent audiences, then you need to think about which channel do you want to dedicate more of, lean towards in that one audience versus the other. Because as you become much more known for one particular area, then you really have to focus on that audience. So it is really hard to have multiple contexts inside of a single channel that you're trying to serve in. So the way I think about it is, what's your primary audience and what's your secondary audience? And so I had to decide at one point that my primary audience was this and not that. That it is primarily around disruptive leadership here on LinkedIn. And I will also sometimes talk about these other things. And I gave up trying to talk about other sharing of personal things, especially on my Facebook channel, because it just was dissonance between trying to stay connected with my Facebook friends and then also stay connected with my audience. So I have two very different presences on Facebook. One's public facing, one's private facing. One's focused, for example, on much more of the things that I'm passionate about on the personal side, and the other side is much more professional. So Marissa, I'm not sure if that helps you with it, but I think, again, if you're focusing on the professional field, then focusing on LinkedIn in that professional space where we're talking about things today is really has to be that core focus. And the volunteering can be a secondary focus or used in another channel. Okay, and then let's go on and let me talk about just a few more things, because I definitely want to get through the last parts of this here. And so if you are interested in creating more content, so I've talked about engaging just with sharing and liking on LinkedIn to express your thought leadership that way, creating articles on LinkedIn. And then if you want to do bigger pieces, articles, webinars, even books or reports, then if you want to actually do research into this process, then again, always starting with the same thing. Starting with defining the audience, challenges, and a hypothesis. This is a slide that I use internally inside of PA Consulting to drive our thought leadership programs. And notice how long of a time we just spend on defining that audience and their challenges. What I find is that if you just take that surface one, you don't go deeper and deeper and do research into the actual challenges and defining what that challenge is, you're going to be solving the wrong problem. Then you collect all the research to, again, more clearly define and create evidence for the problem, create evidence for the solution, and to test how that solution varies depending on the audience's circumstance, industry, size of organization, maturity, tend to be the ones that we test for. Then, very importantly, creating that narrative outline. And from there, we create artifacts. But the narrative outline stays the same no matter what we create. Then we go and amplify the research with marketing before we launch and after we launch. And then we go and have the client conversations. And those generate the leads, the solutions, the engagements that we have. And those engagements come right back into the research process because we discover new problems and challenges that our clients have. And then we go do more research. Again, this virtual cycle of research and solutions and applying them and seeing what works and doesn't work. This really applies to what I call wicked problems, the ones where you can't Google the solution, in the place where, again, these complex problems where thought leadership is so key and essential. And I want to just close out by just going back to Robert Boudet. He has this beautiful model of how to lay out an entire thought leadership strategy. And again, if you're serious about creating thought leadership in your organization, then I highly, highly recommend this book because it talks about how do you create the thought leadership strategy at the very beginning, step number one here. It's about what I just talked about today. And Robert has very much the same philosophy. How do you actually do the research itself? And then how to do the demand creation and supply creation. I particularly love these two things, how they work together. Unfortunately, many organizations that have thought leadership as a function, as part of marketing, do only number three. They start with number three. What are the content and materials we need to create thought leadership so that we can go and do marketing and sales? So they begin with that rather than be thinking about number one, what's the problem, the challenge, and the solutions that we need to have for a particular audience. Because if you start with that, then everything flows from it. But if you start with, well, we have a solution here, what's the marketing and thought leadership content we need to create, you may be missing the mark and not be clearly defining what the problem is. So a couple last things I just want to share, and then we're going to end. I know I'm going over time for today, but I can talk about this for days. The biggest mistakes that I hear, that I see with thought leadership, is people tend to hoard their content. They're afraid to share their knowledge. And I encourage you, if you have any inkling that, oh my goodness, I could be giving away the store, really look back at these problems and these complex problems that people have. Can they really take your slides that you give from a speech? Can they really take your ideas and run with it? And what's the loss of that? Because if they can, they probably weren't a client for you anyways. But if you can do this, create value, move them one step closer to that solution, you will become known as that expert. I talk to so many people who give these beautiful talks and they go, well, I can't give away my slides because then they'll have the solution. I encourage you, if you have a complex problem that you can solve, then give away the slides. And think about what you would share, what you wouldn't share, that you already have in the talk that somebody could take. But could your competitors take it? Could somebody else start a new business? If they can, all the power to them. The reality is there's probably more clients than all of you could probably work with and solve because these problems are so complex. So number one issue, mistake, hoarding your content, hoarding it because you think it's precious. It's not. Put it out there because I guarantee you other people are writing the same thought leadership, but if it's not coming from you, no one knows that you can solve these problems. The second thing is failing to precede your ideas. So you may have a big report coming out, a big research piece coming out, and you hold everything back until that launches. Well, no one knows that you're coming out with this research. So share the fact that you're working on this. Share the fact that you're interested in talking to people with these problems because you want to figure out what the solution is. That's all pre-marketing to your thought leadership coming out. And so example, I will talk about my books and the ideas. I'll even publish the outline before the book is done, even at the very beginning of the process, because I want input into it. And along the way, people are like, oh, you're writing a new book. You're putting out a new report. Can't wait for it to come up. I'm like, yeah, me too. I don't know what the answer is going to be yet. And what that does is preceding the market so that when you have that launch, it's fantastic. The one rule I have for preceding content is I never tell the stories that are going to be here. I'll talk about the ideas, I'll talk about the high level outline, but the evidence, the data, the details behind all of that, I hold back until launch. And then that's where all that meatiness comes in. So the third issue is not doing any of the nurturing that happens after the launch of a big piece of thought leadership content. It's all about the nurture. What content can you give in addition to deepen the conversation? Again, through the editing of all that content, usually 90% of everything that we collect ends up on the editing floor. Literally, we're just sitting on tops of tons of content because we're simplifying this complex problem into a nice bite-sized way of thinking about something, a report, video, book. It's all been edited down. And I use all of that additional content to create additional drops of information to deepen our understanding of this complexity. It could be releasing a transcript or a video of one of the stories to give a deeper insight into, let's just dig deeper into this case study. It's so rich. I could only put so much of it into this report. Here's some more information around that. Would you like to see that? Because the reality is, somebody's probably not going to call you and say, I'm going to hire you right now because of one report. Thought leadership is, again, the whole gamut of content that you put together that out there establishes you as an expert. So the first time somebody hears you may be that from that big piece of thought leadership content, but they need more evidence along the way to be able to feel more comfortable that you understand their problem, that you really deeply understand the core, what that challenge is, and then also that you have a solution. So make sure you share your content, don't hoard it. Make sure you're preceding it and making sure that you are having a great deal of content afterwards to be able to do this. And so a couple of things that I just want to say. Sorry, there's some great things in here. Tim, thank you for joining. I'm so glad that you found this to be helpful. And Eric just gave a little bit of background, long comment here about how we did this. We gave, when I started Altimeter, we did something very different from all the other analyst firms. We gave away all our research for free, whereas everybody put it behind the gate. And it just really made a huge difference in terms of establishing ourselves and creating that aura of expertise around a very particular problem that we had a solution for. So again, thank you so much for joining. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Would love to hear from you in the comments to this about what's working, what's not. And again, look for the article that comes out on Friday in my LinkedIn newsletter. And we, again, just continue the dialogue that we have around thought leadership. I do believe that every single person can become a thought leader, and that there's nothing that can stand in your way of becoming famous for the expertise that you have. All the best to you, and good luck in becoming a thought leader. Take care.